And then this is now more of we're talking, let's try to be more specific as we're saying that this is now like your host pathogen or your host microbe or your host microorganism interaction since we are into bacteriology or your microbiology. So again, let's just review. When we're talking now of the interaction, so ano yung interaction? Anong ibig natin sabihin when we say it's an interaction between the host and the microorganism or the microbe or the pathogen? Like if we go back now, if you remember still your chain of infection wherein you have here, ano meron dyan, Brandon, sa ating sa ating chain of infection? Umpisa na natin kay Brandon. Brandon. Ano date na yun? Brandon?
Ma'am, paulit po, di ko pa narinig.
Since our topic, sabi natin, ang topic today is our host microorganism interaction. So when we're talking of the interaction, now of course, between the host and the microbe, ano ang purpose ngayon nitong ating chain of infection? If we go back to this one, di ba, we talked about this one earlier, dun sa ating disinfection and sterilization. So, ano ang relationship niya ngayon? Ano ang makukuha mong concept as to now, the chain of infection and our topic, the host microorganism interaction?
Ma'am, siguro po yung paano po natatransmit yung mga agents katulad ng bacteria, viruses, and parasites sa isang host, ma'am. At paano din nalilipat nung tawag dito nung tao yung mga bacteria, viruses, and parasites sa ibang tao. Ganun, ma'am.
Okay. So that we're talking, ang nag-uusapan kasi natin in this topic now will be the interaction. So that now we'll be talking more about your agents or your germs. And since this is your bacteriology, magfo-focus tayo sa bacteria. And with that, going back again, since we're talking of the bacteria, babalik na naman tayo dun sa inyong structure or the description of your prokaryotes. So that I went over your reflections dun sa dun pa lang ako so far sa inyong activities. And most of you were saying about the extracellular and the intracellular and the functions of these structure of your bacteria. Okay? So that in here, dito sa host microbe interaction na yun is you will learn more about the bacteria. Ano ba ang capability, can we say that the capability of this microorganism to be able to cause the disease? Siyempre, for them to be able to cause the infection or the disease, they have to go through a lot of processes din. They have to fight for their survival, right? Doon sa host. In the same way, na si host naman, siyempre ipaglalaban din niya yan, meron kang invader. Parang, hindi ka pwedeng tumira sa akin at hindi ka pwedeng mag-cause ng infection. Wherein now, dito sa ating chain of infection, we'll again go back into trying to break the chain of infection. And how could you break that chain of infection? So that's so na hindi magkaroon o hindi magkasakit ang ating susceptible host. Okay? So aaralin natin lahat yan ngayon. We'll try to know more about the agent. Now, about how the host will now protect itself. Paano ba papasok ngayon even into the mode of transmission? And of course, now, what are the different types of infection? Okay? So that we go into a lot of terminologies this afternoon and I hope you don't really get bored. Actually, sana may laro tayo kaya lang parang hindi ko na-develop yung laro ng male versus female. I was just going to pause all of the terminologies, unahan na makaalis ng mga terminologies, but we'll do that next time. Okay? So, since we're talking of the host microbe interaction, so that we're trying to see now paano nagkakaroon ng infection sa human being o sa katawan natin. So, let's try to first define what infection is. So, Infection is, we say here, the growth and multiplication of microorganisms that cause damage to the host. Okay. Once naka-multiply, once naka-inhabit na si inhabit ba tawag doon? Once nakapasok si microorganism sa katawan natin, of course, ignoring the lines of defenses muna, nag-grow siya doon and nag-multiply siya, then definitely that microorganism will be able to cause damage to the host. Okay? So it can also be defined as the bodily invasion of pathogenic microorganisms that reproduce, multiply, and then cause disease through local injury, toxin secretion, or antigen antibody reaction to the host. Now, we have different types of infection. It could be autogenous, it can be iatrogenic, and it can also be opportunistic. So, when we say it's an autogenous infection, we're talking of something, andyan na naman si auto, self-infection. So, bakit self-infection? Hindi mo nakuha sa iba. Ano siya? Nakuha mo sa sarili mo. And this is caused by microorganisms from the microbiota of the host. Now, when we're talking of the microbiota, this would be those microorganisms that we have in our body or the normal flora that normally do not cause any disease. Andyan lang sila, parang sa skin mo, ano yung mga microorganisms na nasa skin natin. But they're not causing any disease or infection yet. It's only when they get out of that normal habitat nila sa katawan natin and they're being transferred to another area in our body that it will now cause an infection. Kasi hindi yung normal habitat niya, lumipat siya sa isang ibang lugar. So that it can now cause an infection. So that is an autogenous infection. Yan ay kinos ng sarili mong microorganisms. Whereas when we talk of iatrogenic infection, these are those that, if you remember, we'll go back to your microbiology history wherein Ignace Semmelweis, di ba, nung yung mga doctors hindi nagwawash ng hands and then they go to another patient and then, of course, contaminated yung kamay nila, na-transfer nila yung infection to another patient. So that is now, you're treating somebody else, you go to another patient, and then hindi ka nag-hand washing, you didn't practice the basic hygiene and all, nagka-infection si another patient, then that is what we call iatrogenic infection. Or may ibang treatment or procedure na ginawa that you develop infection due to this procedure, yan ang tinatawag naman natin na iatrogenic infection. Now, for opportunistic infection, by the word opportunistic, which is the most common infection among our fungi later on and among our immunocompromised hosts. So that the microorganism would take advantage of the situation of the host being immunocompromised. Now, madali siya magkaroon ng infection. Okay? So that is with our infection. So now, we still have one, your nosocomial infection. So we say that this is hospital-acquired infection, of which you are all aware that maraming microorganisms sa hospital. So that again, the 4 common types of nosocomial infections are your UTI, we have lung infection or pneumonia, that's why you have your hospital-acquired pneumonia, surgical site infections, and bloodstream infections. Now, what are the predisposing factors? So that we have here, as mentioned earlier, we have a wide variety of microbes in the hospital environment. And then, of course, you will not be in the hospital if you are not sick. Then, therefore, you are immunocompromised. Then, we also have the chain of transmission. Yun nga, direct or indirect. Pwedeng health worker to patient, pwedeng patient to patient, pwede ring use of fomites, pwedeng airborne, and pwede ring vector-borne. So again, it's reiterated in here that hand washing is still the cornerstone of modern infection control. Okay. So, we also have here different types of infection according to host distribution. So that you have your local, you have your focal, and you have your systemic. Now, we say it is local pag dun lang siya, confined lang siya in one area. For example, we have here your boils. Pag nagka-boil ka, or what we call in layman's term, the pigsa, dun lang yung iyong infection. It doesn't go into another place. Whereas when we say focal infection, meron kang foci, and then it spread to other parts of the body. Pag sinabi na natin systemic an infection, wherein usually there is already a hematogenous spread of the infection so that it gets throughout the body, through the blood or the lymph. So kakalat na siya sa buong system. So that we say is systemic already. Now we have other terms here with relation now into the presence of the bacteria in blood. Because when we talk of the bacteremia, septicemia, pyemia, and toxemia, the suffix emia means this means blood. Okay, so that bacteremia, so you have the emia there, and then you have the bacteria. It means now the presence of bacteria in blood. And the highest concentration of bacteria in blood occurs before the fever spikes. Kasi pag nandun na, remember, later on you get into the toxins. If you will go back to your structure in the cell wall of your gram-negative bacteria, wherein you have your outer membrane, and then you have your thin layer of peptidoglycan. You have there your outer membrane is made up of your LPS. And di ba sabi natin the LPS is made up of three. You have the core, then you have the lipid A. Yun yung lipid A is the one that is giving the endotoxin, which causes now the fever. Now, septicemia, again, you go to the word septic, which means now the active multiplication of bacteria in blood. Whereas pyemia, we always say this pyemia, pyogenes, yung mga pyuria, ganun. That is now the presence of pus-producing organisms that repeatedly invade the bloodstream and become localized at different parts of the body. Whereas, of course, if we say it's toxemia, now it is the presence of toxins in the blood. So you see there that the prefix plus the suffix will already tell you kung ano si bacteremia, ano si septicemia, pyemia, and toxemia. So, now we get into also the classification of disease according to occurrence. So, ito pwede nyo na itong i-explain. Marie Dane, can you just go over the classification of disease according to occurrence and explain it briefly in your own words, or you can set an example? Marie Dane?
Yes po, ma'am. Wait lang po. Naririnig po ba, ma'am?
Oo, naririnig kita. Go.
Okay po. So, sporadic po, it occurs occasionally. Endemic, particular lang siya in a location. Epidemic, maraming number ng individuals ang infected in a particular location. Outbreak naman po, pag mas marami yung naging infected than the previous years or over a short period. Tapos po pandemic, yun yung across the world po. So yung pandemic po, ito po COVID-19, outbreak po kapag kunwari po, last year wala masyadong masakit tapos biglang maraming masakit ngayon dun sa same na infection, ganun po. Tapos epidemic po, larger number than normal po. So kung kunwari zero yung cases nila sa isang lugar tapos biglang may one case, parang ganun po, epidemic na po yun. Tapos po endemic, constant na po siya dun sa particular location. So kung kunwari po sa isang lugar, constant na yung dengue fever, ganun po sa mga tao, ganun po. Endemic po yung tawag doon. Tapos sporadic, biglaan na lang po.
Ano yung factor that would contribute to the endemicity of an infection or an endemicity of a disease? Dane. Marie Dane?
Po, ma'am?
Ano yung factor na magko-contribute sa endemicity ng disease? Parang sabi mo, parang example mo kanina is dengue. Ano yung factor na magko-contribute sa endemicity ni dengue? Ano dapat ang nandun? Para at least sabihin natin, endemic yan ganyan na disease sa ganitong lugar lang. Malaria is endemic in Baggao. Dengue could be, you say, endemic in tropical uh, tropical countries, sabi natin tropical countries, or ano yung factor na specifically contribute sa endemicity ng disease? Bakit
Ma'am,
particular?
carrier po?
Ah,
Carrier po ba, ma'am?
ah, carrier is mobile, you can move from one place to the other, so it cannot, it may not necessarily be the factor. But, di ba sabi natin, endemicity, endemic yan sa ganito. Bakit siya endemic sa disease na yun? O dengue, bakit endemic ang dengue kunyari sa Cagayan? Sabihin natin. What would contribute to the endemicity of a disease? You have what must be present? The habitat, the habitat may be there. Like, sige, isang example ulit, parasit ninyo. Schistosomiasis is endemic in Gonzaga, specifically in Tapel, Gonzaga. What is in Gonzaga? You have not considering you have what? Sabi ni Junavi, the habitat. Okay. So when we talk of endemicity, what should be there? You have the vector of the disease for it to be endemic. So that, kasi yung mga ibang vector nyo, they cannot live in certain places. Kaya nga usually sa pagdating nyo ng virology, lagi mong i-consider na yung saan ka ba nang galing? Kasi andun ba yung vector ng disease? So yun ang one of the factors that you will consider when we're talking of endemicity. Okay? So that also when you said epidemic, topographical location, ma'am, kung saan suitable mag-live ang isang vector. Yes, yun, tama, Kevin. So that you have, the endemicity is really dependent on the presence of the vector. Kaya lagi sinasabi mo na ganyan, endemic yan sa lugar na yun. Okay? Now, with your epidemic, we say now here that, or of a disease or infected individuals in a particular location. Now, very well represented na ang pandemic. Like, sabi mo nga, the COVID-19. Now, the reoccurrence, ba ang tawag natin, re-emergence of polio, where would you classify it? Is it considered na an epidemic or an outbreak? What will you consider it now? Di ba nawala na si polio? So there are diseases that has been eradicated. So that if kahit isang case lang ang biglang re-emerge yan, you can call it is it an epidemic or is it an outbreak? Who will answer? Kevin Talon.
Ano po yun? Pakiulit po, ma'am.
We try to differentiate, sabi natin, between epidemic and outbreak lang. So that when you have, kunyari si polio, di ba wala na tayong cases ng polio? Di ba nawala
yes,
na yun
ma'am.
siya?
Eradicate na po.
Oo, and then last year, bigla tayong nagkaroon ng cases ng polio. So, what would you consider that? Is it an epidemic or is it an outbreak?
Ma'am, for me is an outbreak po, ma'am.
Bakit outbreak?
Kasi bigla ang nagkaroon ng new case of polio at ano ma'am, yung bilang nung dati is yung dati yung normal na bilang nung dati parang tumaas ng bahagya ma'am. Ganun po.
Hindi siya tataas kasi wala na siya dati nagkaroon bigla ulit. Re-emergence. Kasi nag-zero na tayo parang ano din yan. Parang kunyari ang malaria sa Baggao is na zero na. So parang wala nang malaria. So that in any event that there will be a case of malaria, then you can consider that again, sasabihin na naman ng ating Department of Health, may outbreak ng disease. So that once a disease has been eradicated, kahit isa lang yung case na makikita dyan, pwede natin siyang tawagin outbreak. Okay? So, yun yung classification ng disease natin according to occurrence nila. So, it's just not the number, but of course, it depends din. So that you have your sporadic, you have endemic, epidemic, outbreak, and then you have your pandemic. Okay. So, ito na ngayon si carrier. Parang literally, when you are a carrier, you have the disease or you have the agent with you that is not giving you, pwede siyang symptomatic, pwedeng asymptomatic, pero pwede mo siyang ilipat sa iba. So that we say that a courier is a person, nag-e-echo ba ako? Hindi. Parang may naririnig akong echo. So,
No, ma'am.
hindi? Okay. So, pag sinabi naman natin carrier, Tam. Tam? Sa iyo ang slide ng carrier, Tam. Explain. Go, Tam.
Ma'am, bali kapag carrier, ma'am, nasa kanya yung parang nasa kanya yung agent pero hindi nagma-manifest sa kanya yung disease.
Mm-mm.
So, asymptomatic siya pero nasa kanya yung agent. So, merong types ng carrier. Una is yung causal or acute or transient carrier. Ma'am, ito yung mabilisan lang na parang yung agent mag-stay lang siya sa katawan mo pero mawawala rin siya in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Ngayon, meron yung chronic carrier. So, chronic meaning pang matagalan, sana all. So, yung chronic carrier, ma'am,
May hugot doon. Sino yung
medyo
pangmatagalan? Sige.
ano, medyo matagal nag-stay yung agent dun sa katawan ng tao. Next is yung
Akala ko sa
convalescent
puso ni
carrier.
Tam.
Ayan, so yun ma'am, yung pangatlong type ay recovered na siya from an infection pero hindi totally na natanggal sa katawan yung agent. So ibig sabihin carrier pa rin siya. Parang recovered lang siya kasi wala na sa kanya yung signs and symptoms ng yung disease pero yung agent nasa katawan niya pa rin. So yung active carrier naman yun,
Ano yun?
active yung agent sa kanya.
Ano yung yun?
Ma'am, yun, yung active carrier.
Mm-mm. This would be your?
Wait, ma'am.
Sige, kailang Tam.
Yung active carrier ay nagmamanifest sa kanya yung signs and symptoms ng disease.
Hmm?
Ma'am.
So, merong manifestation.
So, yun.
And then, pwede niyang i-transmit yung disease to others. Okay? So,
Yes, ma'am.
wait lang, Kevin. Naglilista lang ako, Kevin. Okay. So that, for example, sa hepatitis B, ano ka? If ever you are a carrier of hepatitis B, would you be an active carrier or you are a chronic carrier? Or are you a causal transient carrier or are you a convalescent carrier?
Ma'am, pag hepatitis B, kasi mamang alam ko kapag once na nagkaroon ka ng Hepa B virus, lifetime na yun. So, nasa yun na. So, chronic carrier ka.
Okay.
Hindi ko sure, ma'am.
Hindi. Okay lang yan. Kasi you will learn about your Hep B also later on. Okay. So, pwede kang chronic carrier. So, iba kasi sa hepatitis B, you have to check first for the titer ng yung ibang tawag, serologic markers ng hepatitis B. Okay? So, thank you, Tam. So, alam na natin kung ano si causal. Sabi nga ni Tam, it harbors the microorganism temporarily for a few days or weeks. And then, yung chronic, nasa yun na yan. For example, dito you have your typhoid bacillus, and then your convalescent, recovered from infection, pero nandun pa rin si pathogen sa'yo, large number of the pathogen, and of course, you have the active carrier that you are already infected yourself, sa may signs and symptoms ka, and you can transmit the disease to others. Okay, so let's get into the phases of infection. Tawagin ko dito. Zarina, phases of infectious disease. Pa-explain din. Okay. So where do you think is the highest number of reproduction ng bacteria sa iyong phase of infectious disease? Yes, it's in the clinical or the illness periods wherein you will now get to see the peak characteristic signs. So, andun na yung characteristic of the illness talaga. So, that in the incubation period kasi parang din yun sa inyong bacterial growth curve wherein ito pa lang yung kakukuha mo pa lang. So, mag-establish pa lang si microorganism sa katawan natin. A-adjust siya doon. And then, pag hindi siya na-neutralize ng ating antibodies or ng ating immune system, will be able to reproduce and multiply and thereby colonize. Then you will have already the different phases progressing into your prodromal, then to your clinical, and of course, after you have the clinical symptoms, management can set in. Alam na nila kung anong dapat na ibigay sa iyo so that the decline period will follow after now your antimicrobial management. And then, syempre, you will be now on your way to full recovery. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Zarina. So, again, more terminologies. Brandon. Brandon? Asan si Brandon na?
Ma'am,
Ikaw na.
ito po ma'am.
Yeah. Terminologies from causative to mode of transmission.
Causative or etiologic agent. It is a microorganism responsible for causing infection or infectious disease. Pathogen, organism capable of producing disease. Virulence, a quantitative measure of the degree of pathogenicity of a particular microorganism. Non-pathogenic, microorganism that does not cause disease, may be part of the normal flora. Opportunistic pathogen, an agent capable of causing disease only when the host resistance is impaired. Mode of action, means by which etiologic agents are brought in contact with the human host. Yun lang, ma'am.
Okay. So, more of your terminology so that when you talk of a pathogen, lagi pag sabi natin pathogen, hindi mo na kailangan sabihin ko ano yan because this would be the organisms that are capable of producing the disease na. Whereas, if you have your mga opportunista, parang kunyari si friendship mo ay taking advantage din of your vulnerability. So, ganun din ang iyong opportunistic pathogen. Okay? So when we talk, we'll learn later what pathogenicity and what is the difference of pathogenicity versus your virulence. So that with the mode of transmission, so dito nakikita nyo na nasa third circle na tayo ng chain of infection. So that you would like to see how the microorganism can get out of the port of exit and then get into the port of entry again sa another susceptible host. So, for the vehicle and mortality, can I have Faye, Beran? Faye? Faye, are you there? Asan si Faye? Wala si Faye? Giselle?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Next slide, Giselle.
Vehicle or fomite, a non-living entity that is contaminated with the etiologic agent and as such is the mode of transmission for that agent. So yung vehicle, ma'am, example nito yung mga gamit sa hospital, yung gamit, ano na yan, inanimate objects po. Vector, a living entity, animal, insect, or plant that transmits the etiologic agent. So vector, ma'am, kunwari, sa yung mosquito, ma'am, sa malaria, ganun. Host, an animal or plant that harbors or nourishes another organism. Parasite, an organism which is dependent on another organism for food and shelter. Surveillance, any type of epidemiologic investigation that involves data collection for characterizing circumstances surrounding the incidence or prevalence of a particular disease. Morbidity, the state of disease, and its associated effects on the host. Mortality, death resulting from disease.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Giselle. So that you can now differentiate your fomite over a vector. Kasi you say, dito sabi natin, a vector is a living entity. Whereas your fomite is a non-living entity. Like for example now, let's give an example of each of your vehicle or your vector. Ira. Saan si Ira? Ira?
Yes, ma'am.
Example lang ng vehicle or fomite na pwedeng mag-ano ng disease, transmission for an agent of disease.
Sa pagkakaintindi ko po, ma'am, yung vehicle can be food.
Alin,
Tapos
Ira?
po yung vehicle po, ma'am, is like yung mga food po na nai-ingest.
Okay. Okay.
And then yung fomite po are yung objects po na nag-carry po ng infection like mga utensils, damit, and the like
Yeah.
po.
Okay.
Yun lang po, ma'am.
Okay. Pag vector, give one example of vector.
Yung mosquito po, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Ira. So, we proceed with the next slide. We have here strain typing, we have your reservoir and the common source. Yung strain typing, these are laboratory-based characterization of etiologic agents designed to establish their relatedness to one another during a particular outbreak or epidemic. Whereas your reservoir, origin of the etiologic agent or location from which they disseminate. So, dito muna nag-i-stay yung inyong etiologic agent. Whereas a common source would be the etiologic agent responsible for an epidemic or outbreak originates from a single source or reservoir. Okay? This would be more common yun sa mga foodborne infections, or when we say of common source, like more ito sa gastrointestinal infections. So now we get into the host microbe relationship. We say that once the microbe gets into the host, then there is already a relationship that is formed. Baka sabihin ni Tam, sana all. So what are the different relationships between a host and a microbe? So let's say Alex Babaran. Diyan si Alex.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Alex.
Yes.
Ikaw sa host-microbe relationship.
Yes, ma'am. We have four types of host-microbe relationship. First, we have the symbiosis. It is the association of two organisms living in close proximity. Etong symbiosis, ma'am, sa pagkakaalala ko, is these organisms do not harm each other. And the next is mutualism, refers to a mutually beneficial relationship between two species.
An example of this would be E. coli in our intestines and
Okay.
commensalism, the relationship wherein the parasite derive benefit from the host without causing injury or harm to the host. And parasitism, a relationship whereby one organism derives benefit at the expense of others. Yung parasitism, ma'am, is the parasite harms the host.
Okay. So that in the current situation now, okay, gawan mo ng example in the current situation that we're in now. O yung sa mga relationship nyo with friends, ganyan. Ano yung relationship na nade-develop?
Ma'am, for an example of symbiosis would be yung family, ma'am, na that are living together in a house, for example. And ang mutualism, ma'am, this is a give and take relationship. So for example, in a magjowa setting, ganun, ma'am. In a relationship, it should be always give and take.
Okay.
Tapos commensal, I'm not sure, basta po commensalism would be basta hindi po hinaharm ng 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 isang tao yung someone, so that would be commensalism. And parasitism, ma'am, this is when we cause harm to a certain someone, for example po sa enemy natin. Ganun.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. So the best would be, of course, there should be like, for example, na hindi yung, di ba nandyan yung parang you get so self-centered or you just want to get something from somebody else. So that the best my host microbe relationship here na pwede siguro i-ano natin would be, of course, the mutualism, wherein you benefit from the relationship. Okay. So we get into the next slide. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. So the next slide is now more on pakaraming terminologies dito. More terminologies we'll have Alfred. Saan si Alfred? Alfred?
Ma'am, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Alfred.
Ma'am, dito ako, ma'am.
Yeah. Read the slide and explain briefly in your own words.
Sige, ma'am. Sige po, ma'am. Pathogenicity, ability of the organism to produce disease. Ito yung mga organisms natin na na nagbibigay ng sakit. Na ganun. Tapos pathogenicity island, large groups of genes that are associated with pathogenicity and are located in the bacterial chromosome. Genes that sa pathogenicity island, dito large group of genes that are associated with grupo po siya ng genes na
ano pag genes? Ang
na
tinatawag natin yung mga genes. Ano yung genes? Nasaan yung mga genes?
Associated siya ng pathogens and nakalocate siya sa may bacterial chromosome. Tapos invasiveness, the ability of the organism to enter host tissues, multiply and spread faster. To invasiveness po yung yung abilidad nung na kayang pasukin yung host na yung tissues ng host, tapos dun siya mag-reproduce at mag-spread na rin po. Tapos toxigenicity, ability of the organism to produce toxins. Ito naman po yung yung mga kaya nilang mag-produce ng toxins sa katawan nila. Tapos toxoid, non-poisonous forms of toxins which can be used for vaccination. Ito naman po yung yung mga toxins na na hindi siya nakaka-harm, non-poisonous, tapos pwede din po siyang gamitin for vaccination. Ang pati po
Okay na. Sige, thank you. So that can you say then that invasiveness of a microorganism could contribute to its pathogenicity? Alfred? Alfred? Alfred, nawala na si Alfred. Okay. Charlene, can we say that invasiveness can also can contribute to the pathogenicity of your organism? Charlene? Wala si Charlene?
Ay,
Ah.
I'm sorry, di ko narinig.
Alfred, yung invasiveness ba magko-contribute yan sa pathogenicity ng iyong organism? Alfred? O nawala ka na ulit. Okay. So, when we say invasiveness, that means that the organism now, that it will increase the ability of the organism to produce the disease. Okay? So, these are the general stages of microbial host interaction. First, we do, of course, the physical encounter between the host at saka ni microorganism. So, ignoring all of those lines of defenses, the microorganism colonization will happen now dun sa host surface. So that once it gets into the host, then there will be, kapasok na siya, sabi ko, ignoring all lines of defenses, nakapasok siya, na-invade na siya. And of course, that invasion would already mean now the reproduction and then going through the different tissues, it becomes systemic, and therefore you will have now the outcome, which may be, it could be severe, it could be mild. It depends on how the microorganism behaves inside the body of the host. Okay, so now let's talk about the microbial flora. When we talk of microbial flora, ano ba yung microbial flora? Now, these are the microorganisms that are commonly found on or in body sites of healthy persons. So you also call this your microbiota. So they're also called your normal, usual, or the indigenous flora. Okay? So these are yung mga nandiyan na sa katawan natin that if we're talking about the relationship, according to relationship, these are now mutualism, or they can also be like a symbiosis. So, yung microbial flora natin, pwede silang resident, pwede silang transient. Of course, when you say they are resident, they already stay there for months or years or forever. Kasabi ni Tam, sana all forever. Whereas your transient flora, ito yung present lang sila sandali. Parang when you're looking for a transient accommodation, you only stay there for a day or two, tapos aalis ka na. Parang ganun din si microorganism. Pupunta lang siya sa'yo sandali, and then is either natanggal mo siya by antimicrobial means or natural na nawala siya sa katawan mo. So that the presence of these microbial flora or this indigenous flora is dependent on physiological factors of temperature. So you go back again to your growth requirements. Ayaw nila ng temperature, so mawawala sila. It's either mamatay sila or they have to get out of that environment kasi hindi yun yung environment na gusto nila. And then of course moisture. Love ng microorganisms yan. So that pag medyo nag-dry si skin mo, nag-desquamate yung skin mo, nawala din si microorganism mo. So that the presence of certain nutrients and inhibitory substances. Okay? So if the nutrients that are necessary for the growth of the microorganism is present in that area, of course they will stay. Pag wala, mawawala na din sila. Pag may inhibitory substances naman, syempre, they cannot stay there because there are inhibitory substances that would inhibit their growth. So, syempre, ayaw naman nila mag-stay dyan kung ganyan. So, they have to, either they just die a natural death na sinasabi natin, or mawawala na lang sila on their own. So, now, this microbial flora, they also serve as the first line of defense against microbial pathogens. Paano nangyayari yun? So that pag nandiyan na sila sa skin mo, let's take for example, your Staphylococcus aureus. Nandiyan siya sa skin mo. So what does it do? If other microorganisms try to come in, or considering that you have skin, your skin is intact, walang breakage or walang sugat or walang anything. So that pag may ibang microorganisms na pupunta, meron dyan yung kanilang competition. They will not compete for the nutrients. Parang sabi nila, matira ang matibay. Nauna ako dito sa iyo, pero hindi ka na pwede dito. Ganun din yung mga ano ng microorganisms. So that they also compete for receptors. Ano yung receptors? Importante ito sa binding o attachment ng microorganisms into the location or doon sa parang sa tissue tropism na tinatawag natin. Okay? So, competition for nutrients. And then they have the mutual inhibition by metabolic or toxic product and mutual inhibition by antibiotic materials or bacteriocins. Okay. They also assist in digestion and absorption of nutrients and also in the synthesis of vitamin K. And they play a role in toxin degradation and of course contribute to maturation of the immune system. When we say maturation of the immune system, of course, kahit masabihin natin wala silang ginagawa sa iyo, but nakaguard pa rin ang immune system natin to deter the production of an infection. So, yan ang mga role ng ating microbiota. So, now, these are just a composition of microbial flora at different body size. So that you will see na meron kang normal flora sa skin, meron kang normal flora sa respiratory system. So they're practically all over the body din. Like for example, sa skin, ang common would be your Candida species, your Micrococcus, Staphylococcus, Clostridium, Propionibacterium, and your Dipteroids. And sa mouth naman, what is most predominant is your Streptococcus. So that when you do your AFB stain, collect ka ng sputum, you will be able to see this normal flora together with the AFB bacilli if it is present in your sputum. Okay, so the common normal flora or the common microbiota of the mouth are your Staphylococcus epidermidis, you have your Streptococcus mitis, sandwich, salivarius, and mutans, and the rest. And of course, less common in the mouth would be your Staphylococcus aureus kasi alam niyo naman kung saan sila nag-grow. And also your Enterococcus species, your Eichonella corrodens, and the others. Now, in the respiratory tract, dito naman, andito pa rin yung ating Viridans streptococci, wherein they're commonly found in the mouth, in the nasopharynx, and oropharynx. But later on, you will see why they remain to be your normal flora because also of the defense mechanism of humans, what they have in the mouth, your saliva that protects you from getting ang tawag doon, poprotektahan ka niya para hindi ka magkasakit, nano-neutralize na si microorganism kahit nandun sila. And then sa nasopharynx, you have your cilia, yung mga hairs sa nose, and also in the oropharynx. Now, so ito lang na-tabulate lang yung mga common and the less common. These were all lifted up from Mayhon Microbiology. And these are the usual flora of the gastrointestinal tract and also of the genitourinary tract. So you see here that you have, of course, in the genitourinary tract is your Lactobacillus species, which now also try to maintain the pH in the GI tract. Okay, so again, these are medically important members of the normal flora. It was tabulated according to location. And then, of course, nasa ano naman yan, huwag na natin i-ano yan. Summary of the members of the normal flora and their anatomic location. So you see here, you have your colon, throat, vagina, meron kang Bacteroides, your Lactobacillus, can be in the mouth, in the colon, in the vagina, and then your Staphylococcus aureus sa nose and skin, and your Viridans streptococcus sa mouth and the nasopharynx. Okay, so now, we get into the pathogenesis of infection. We have already defined what pathogenicity is. So let's have Godwin, Tabalbag. Dalawa sila eh. Si Godwin, tsaka si Tabalbag, tsaka si
Ma'am.
Umayo. Yes, Godwin. Define pathogenicity first, and then you just go over the slide on true pathogens and our opportunistic pathogens.
Ma'am,
Blinang ko po muna.
pathogenicity yung ability ng isang microorganism na mag-cause ng disease.
Okay, very good. Now, types of we have here types of pathogens. You have your true and your opportunistic pathogen. Just differentiate one from the other.
Ma'am, tong true pathogens, kaya niyang mag-cause ng disease kahit sa mga healthy individuals, ma'am.
Okay.
Tapos itong opportunistic, ma'am, ito yung nagkakos lang siya ng disease sa mga taong hindi healthy yung immune system.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, from the word true sila talaga, magkukos sila because the pathogens are those that cause disease in man. So that when you say is a true pathogen, yan yung magkaka-cause talaga kahit sa healthy person, and yung opportunistic doon sa mga immunocompromised. Okay, thank you, Godwin. Now, these are the conditions compromising the host defenses and what are the different organisms. Like for example, mga foreign bodies. Now, they will compromise the host defenses in a way that yung mga catheters or the shunts, ito pwedeng pag-growhan o microorganisms can grow in these catheters. Okay? So that mako-compromise ang host defense. Alcoholism also, like burns can grow, your Pseudomonas aeruginosa can grow easily on burns. Kaya yan ang iniingatan pag sa mga burn patients. And of course, you have also your immunosuppression, wherein now if your immune system is suppressed due to drugs or due to congenital disease, mga organisms na pwedeng mag-cause kaagad ng infection dyan would be your Candida albicans, you have there your Pneumocystis jirovecii, it used to be your Carini, ito yung sa pneumonia for our AIDS patient or HIV patients. Okay? So, virulence. Si Godwin Umayam naman. When we talk of virulence, ano naman ang virulence? Asan si Godwin Umayam? Godwin? Pag wala si Godwin, si Harley. Harley? Wala din si Harley. Israel?
Ma'am, try lang po, ma'am.
Okay lang yan, try. Define
Ma'am,
virulence first.
virulence means, ma'am, the ability of a microorganism to resist the immune system or decrease the effect of the immune system towards the pathogen, ma'am.
Virulence would be more a characteristic of your pathogen or your agent of disease. So ano yung when we talk of virulence, this is more a characteristic of your pathogen. So ano yung characteristic na yun na tinatawag nating virulence? May endosome. Mamaya pa si endosome. Sabi ni Jamie. Jamie, ano yung virulence? Jam?
Hello, ma'am. Hello po.
Yes. Yeah.
Ma'am, yung virulence pa parang characteristic po siguro ng isang pathogen po, ma'am, na tawag yun. Yung kumbaga part po ng kanilang katawan po na parang mas kumapit po sila doon sa para mas mag-cause pa po sila ng disease, ma'am.
Okay. Yung mag-cause sila ng disease. Sabi ni Charlene, degree of pathogenicity, that is also correct. Sabi ni Faye, parang siya yung tumutulong sa pathogen to invade the host. Pwede rin yan. Sabi ni Rob, measure of severity of the disease. Pwede rin yan. Defense mechanism of microorganisms. Hindi siya defense mechanism. It is tanggalin mo si tanggalin mo si defense. It is kasi hindi naman niya yung the virulence is not a characteristic to protect itself from pwede rin. From being phagocytized, pwede rin siguro siya. Tam, ability of a pathogen to overcome a person's resistance against a disease. And sabi ni Diane, ability to adapt and bypass the immune system. And sabi ni Unica, quantity of microorganisms to infect a person. And sabi ni Vincent, the degree of relative ability of microorganisms to cause disease, degree or damage caused by a microbe to is caused, sabi ni C. So that you are all right into this saying that ang virulence is going back to pathogenicity is also the ability of a microorganism to cause a disease or the degree, sabi nga, sino nag-degree of pathogenicity. Okay, so related sila. So that these microbial virulence factors are, they will be inhibiting phagocytosis. They will also facilitate adhesion. Sabi nga natin, kailangan nilang umattach dun sa host cell. Kasi kung di sila maka-attach, courtesy of different receptors, hindi sila makaka-multiply and they will not be able to cause the infection. Kasi they need to get into that para at least they, to multiply, to reproduce, to cause the infection. And also, they may be damaging tissues through the production of toxins and extracellular enzymes. Okay, so now what is this ability to resist phagocytosis? So ano yung mga structure or what do the agent have to be able to resist phagocytosis? Kasi alam natin na pag na-phagocytize siya, although in some bacteria, they can still live inside the macrophage or they can still try to survive kahit sila ay na-phagocytize na. Now, there are certain structures or characteristics, tawag ba nung characteristics, ng ating microorganisms para hindi sila ma-phagocytize. So, we'll have to get into another one now. May mga hindi ko pa natawag. Si Harley. Juna V.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Juna
Yes.
V.
Ma'am,
Ikaw na dyan sa slide na yan.
ma'am, the ability to resist phagocytosis. So we have the capsule and protein A. The yung pinagkaiba nung dalawa kasi, ma'am, kapag yung sa capsule, they inhibit the activation of complement by making the structure to which complement proteins bind. So hindi na makakapag-bind yung protein kasi nga ininhibit nila, parang pinigilan nila yung activation nun. Samantalang kapag sa protein A po kasi, they interfere with the binding of the host antibodies to the surface of the organism. Parang kapag nagkasakit kasi tayo is nagde-develop tayo ng antibodies. So kapag sa protein A po, nag-i-interfere yung pag-bind nun. So, nare-resist yung phagocytosis. To summarize po.
Okay. Okay. So, na-explain naman mabuti ni Juna V. We have the capsule and then you have your protein A. So, how about now your cell wall proteins? With the, asan na yung sino kasunod mo kanina? Mark. Mark?
Ma'am?
Yes. How about our cell wall proteins? What is their role in inhibiting phagocytosis?
Wait.
Or you
Cell
talk
wall Cell
Cell
wall
wall protein.
proteins, M protein, heat resistant and acid resistant proteins. So yung M proteins, ma'am, sila po yung nakakaano para ano yun? Para maging resistant po yung isang microorganism sa mga heat, ganun po. Tapos fimbriae and outer membrane protein. Ano yun? Fimbriae.
Fimbriae. Your fimbriae or your pili, which is
Wait lang,
present
ma'am.
in your
Wait lang, ma'am.
sige lang.
Ma'am, yung fimbriae po parang ginagamit po ng mga bacteria para ano niya?
Ano na yun? Ulit?
Para mag-bind po, ganon. Para magdikit-dikit sila, ma'am.
Okay.
Tap,
Hindi magdikit-dikit para mag-attach, para maka-attach sila dun sa, diba yan yung adhesion?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Which is a characteristic of your Neisseria gonorrhea. How about your mycolic acid?
Ma'am, yung mycolic acid po is yung ano, ma'am. Wait.
Ano si mycolic acid mo?
Ma'am, yung diba, fatty acid po siya. So, mahirap po siyang maano ng mga kapag yung mga drugs, ma'am, ganon, hindi siya agad-agad na
Mark, sa phagocytosis lang muna tayo.
ay phagocytosis. Wait lang. Bacteria. Ma'am, yung mycolic acid, syempre mahirap siyang ma-penetrate, ma'am. So kapag ganun po, kaya nilang mabuhay kahit nasa loob na sila ng mga macrophage, ganun, ma'am.
Okay.
Tapos yung antigenic
variation. Ano naman sa antigenic variation?
Ma'am, may ina-alter nyo po yung mga proteins, gano'n, para maka-survive.
Identify.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that you have an antigenic variation kasi di ba we have a specific antigen-antibody reaction usually. So that yung antigenic variation na iniiba nila yung sa protein surfaces nila para hindi sila ngayon makita. So na-evade nila ang phagocytosis. So these are just microbial interferences with phagocytic activities. You have here, anong gagawin ni anong type of interference is streptococci? Ang gagawin niya is to kill the phagocyte. How? Because it produces your streptolysin. Whereas your staphylococci also can kill a phagocyte by means of now your leukocidin. Okay, yan yung mga mechanism or the factor responsible for getting rid of the phagocyte para hindi sila ma-phagocytize. Okay, so Charlene, hindi ka ba hindi ka on ng microphone? Charlene? Okay, Jan Vincent Patung. Hemolysins and leukocidins. Jan. Hemolysins and leukocidins. Asan na si Jan?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
O sige. Go. Yung nasa slide. Jan. What are hemolysins? Wala ka mic dyan?
Ma'am?
Ha? Nawawala ka. Ah, okay na, okay na. Nawawala si Jan. Hindi maganda yung ano yata.
Ma'am, hello po.
Na.
Ayun, okay na po ba?
Okay na, go.
Okay po. Hemolysins po yung ito yung ability ng bacteria to lyse or break down the red blood cells, and at the same time, nagkakause siya ng toxic effects or um, as gradually destroying also the white blood cells. Yung pagkakaintindi ko po, ma'am. Sa leukocytes. Tapos,
Leukocytes.
yes, ma'am, the leukocytes po yung mga nagre-release ng mga nagre-release by pathogenic staphylococci and nagkakos ng lysosomal discharge into cell cytoplasm. Example is yung Panton Valentin ng staphylococcal leukocidin.
Okay. So
Yan po.
you're okay, so you have others like yung hemolysins natin. This is exotoxins from bacteria. So sabi nga niya dyan, so nilalize niya sa red blood cells and then it will induce toxic effects on WBC. So sabi natin pag toxic effect yan, that would like it would be like a poison that will now kill your WBC. Whereas your leukocidin, si Panton Valentin, this is the one that is the leukocidin produced by your staphylococci. Now, we also have surface structures that promote adhesion to host cells and tissues. Okay, and we'll have wala pa rin si Harley. Yan si Harley. Nolan. Kita ko si Nolan. Nolan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Surface structures.
Wait lang, ma'am. Yung adhesins, ma'am, generally speaking po, sila yung nasa surface ng cells, ma'am, that as it says there, nagme-mediate po ng attachment. So it is necessary po yung adhesins natin for pagkapit nung bacterial cell or viral cell, yes ma'am, ng pathogen should I say, dun sa mismong host. Then ang main adhesins in the bacteria po, yung kakasabi po kanina na tungkol sa fimbriae, it enables bacteria to adhere to host cell surfaces offering resistance by attachment. Sila yung parang maliliit na hair follicles po natin, ma'am, yung maliliit. Yes, ma'am. Then itong surface polysaccharides natin, which includes yung LPS natin, ma'am, lipopolysaccharides, which contributes to the negative charge po ng ating bacterial cell kapag gram negative. Tama ba? Negative ba pag LPS?
LPS ka, LPS would be for your gram-negative
yes.
cell
Ayun.
wall.
Yes.
Okay.
Yun
So,
po.
this is just now a picture of your going back again to your bacterial structure wherein you said, di ba, ang cell wall ng ating gram-negative would be composed of your thin peptidoglycan layer plus your outer membrane wherein you have there your lipopolysaccharides, then you have there the non-pili because you see there this is your adherence protein nasa pilus singular daw ng ating pilay. So that here you have also the capsule. Ito yung mga nagko-contribute. Ito yung mga surface, ang tawag natin dati dun sa ating bacterial structure, surface appendages na magko-contribute to the virulence now of your microorganism. Okay? So, for the surface virulence factors important to bacterial pathogenesis, Like for your gram-positive cocci, you have your M protein for your Streptococcus pyogenes and your protein A for Staphylococcus aureus. Whereas for gram-negative cocci, you have there the polysaccharide capsule ng Neisseria meningitidis and your polypeptide capsule for your Bacillus enterosis. And for the non-gram-negative bacilli, including Haemophilus influenza, you also have the polysaccharide capsule. Sa E. coli, you have your protein pili, and then your Salmonella, again, a polysaccharide capsule, and your Yersinia pestis, you have there your V and W proteins. Okay. Now, the ability to survive intracellularly and proliferate. Sabi nga natin kanina, even if they are phagocytized, like for your Mycobacterium tuberculosis, with a very, tawag natin doon sa kanyang wall, which is made of your mycolic acid, that even if they are phagocytized, they can still live intracellularly. So, andun pa rin sila. They're not really eliminated after phagocytosis. Instead, they are able to survive intracellularly, and being able to survive, pwede pa rin silang dumami. Pwede pa rin silang mag-proliferate. Okay? Like, for here, we have examples like your meningococci. This lactoferrin and with others are produced by some organisms. This is used as a source of iron. And then we have your Haemophilus influenza. They produce an IgA protease that degrade the IgA found at mucosal surfaces. And these Borrelia species circumvent host antibodies by shifting T cell surface antigens. So all of these, they use it now to survive when they get inside the cell. Okay? Pwede pa rin silang mag-cause ng infection. Now, we talked earlier of invasion. Now, when we say invasion, there's si Princess Erica Bayukan. Is Princess here? Princess. Ralph Jericho. Ralph? Ralph? Wala si Ralph. Rangel? Wala din. Ria? Ria?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ria. Invasion. Dissemination.
So, invasion, ma'am, dun sa word na invasion, invade, so ability to penetrate and grow in tissues. Sa dissemination naman po, disease or organisms is spread to distant sites. Oh my gosh, ang ingay pa ng aso, sorry. Tapos yung Clostridium perfringens, highly invasive organisms that may not disseminate. So, hindi po sila nag-scatter or hindi po sila nag-i-spread dun sa site.
Okay.
Yun lang.
So, pag sinabi ding invade, dun lang siya sa tissue. Meron tayo ditong tissue tropism. Pero pag nag-disseminate siya, aside from the invaded tissue, it can get into other parts. Tama ba? Ria?
Ma'am?
Yung sa invasion, di ba? Sa pag nag-invade siya sa isang tissue part lang. But if it gets out of that tissue and dun sa mga iba pa sa paligid niya, that would be what you will call your dissemination. Tama?
Yes. Yes po.
Okay. So, example of our microorganism that highly invasive but may not disseminate. So, dun lang siya si Clostridium perfringens. Hindi na siya but it is highly invasive that it can get, pag invasive kasi di ba may layering naman yung ating tissues so that it can get deeper into the tissue. Whereas, if we said the ability to produce extracellular toxins and enzymes, let's get into Raika. Nandiyan si Raika. Parang di sumagot si Ralph kanina. Ralph, nandiyan ka? Ralph. Si Kayla. Rowa Kayla. we're talking of toxins and proteases.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah. Kayla, go.
So, yung toxins po, ma'am, is yung mga substances po na pinoproduce ng organisms po wherein pag na pag na parang pag nag-interact po yun sa normal system po ng normal metabolism po ng ating body is magkakos po ng harm. Then yung proteases and hyaluronidases, ito po yung mga substances po na nililiquify po nila yung hyaluronic acid at the connective tissue matrix naman po na ito po yung way para mag-spread po yung bacteria sa tissues po. Tapos madi-disseminate na po yung
Okay. So we're talking of extracellular toxins. So alam naman natin pag when we talk of toxins, this would always be able to produce harm kasi they are poisonous substances that are produced by the organisms. And your proteases and hyaluronidases, this is the hyaluronidases specifically for staphylococcus o streptococcus. I-check ko lang mamaya ha. These are soluble substances already that liquefy, okay, the hyaluronic acid of the connective tissue matrix. Now, this will help into the invasiveness and then it also promotes now dissemination of the infection. Now, we all know what enzymes are, what they're able to do, that you always have enzymes in ano na ang role ng enzymes? To break down so that they always have to catabolism, right? So that we have different enzymes also produced by our microorganisms. So that these are meant to protect them also and to aid in their survival in the host. So let's have Robert Jab Simeon to tell us about the collagenase, hyaluronidase, and your coagulase. Is Robert here?
Hello,
Okay,
ma'am.
Robert.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Collagenase breaks down collagen, which forms the connective tissue of muscles and other body organs and tissues. Hyaluronidase hydrolyzes hyaluronic acid, a type of polysaccharide that holds together certain cells of the body, particularly cells of the connective tissue, helping the organism spread from its initial site of infection. Examples are S. pyogenes, S. and S. perfringens. Coagulase, produced by S. aureus and accelerates the conversion of fibrinogen to a fibrin clot. The clot may protect the bacteria from phagocytosis by walling off the infected area and by coating the organisms with a layer of fibrin, ultimately resulting to the evasion of bacteria from other defenses of the host.
Okay. So all of these enzymes again serves to protect the organism from being destroyed by the host. Okay, so that it produces your collagenase, hyaluronidase, so ayan, streptococcus pyogenes, and then you have your Clostridium perfringens. And the coagulase of your Staphylococcus aureus, which you will be doing an exercise later on sa mga laboratory activities natin. And you also have your kinase, wherein you have your streptokinase and your staphylokinase. So what are these kinases? They are you have your streptokinase and your ang tawag dito? Staphylokinase. Ano yung ano nila? Ang role ng mga kinase? What are they? Si Rona. Rona? Wala si Rona. Si Bariwan. Si? Asan si merong nag-message. Princess. Chinese. Princess.
Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon po.
Good afternoon. So,
Ma'am, may kasi ako kanina kaya hindi po ako nakasagot. Natawag daw po ako, sabi nila.
Sino to?
Ako, ma'am, Princess po.
Sige, game.
Ma'am, yung
Tinatawag na kita.
pagkakataon ko sa kinase sa biochem po is transfer of phosphate. Phosphate
Phosphate
group.
group. Sa biochem, sa micro. Ano si streptokinase? Ano sabi natin pag mga enzymes, anong ginagawa nila? What do enzymes do? Princess.
Ma'am, they are, catalyst po.
Okay. So, if you have a streptokinase, ano usually ang ginagawa ni streptokinase o staphylokinase? Ano nangyayari? Princess. Ayun, meron na naman ano. Okay, sabi ni Dexter, it dissolves clot po. Right there. Okay? It now nagpo-promote siya ng thrombolytic activity. How about your immunoglobulin A protease and your leukocidin? Dexter, tuloy mo na. Dexter. Dexter. Francisco. Wala si Dexter? Kaka-chat mo lang, Dexter. So you have also your immunoglobulin A protease or your IgA protease which destroy IgA antibodies found on secretions.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, yung IgA po kasi is for ano siya, prevention of bacterial and viral invasion. So i-inhibit ng protease yung IgA in order para makapag-invade sila yung bacteria or yung virus sa mucous membrane po, parang ganun.
Okay, and your leukocidin?
Ma'am, ganun din po yung work niya. Ma'am, for neutrophils naman siya, tas macrophage. Yung macrophage, ma'am, di ba parang siya yung nagsaswallow, parang ganun.
Yung magpapagositize ng ating
Yes.
bacteria. Okay, so i-destroy nila yan. Kasi lahat ng mga enzymes na ito na pinoproduce ng ating microorganism is aimed into evading all of the the defenses of the host. Okay, so we also have your exotoxins. So when we're talking of exotoxins, these are those that they are produced by both gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria and are secreted by the organism into the extracellular environment, or they are released on lysis of the organisms. And these exotoxins can mediate direct spread of the microorganisms through the matrix of connective tissues and can cause cell and tissue damage. Now, the toxin gene is encoded by phages. If you remember, you go back into into our structure of the bacteria when we said that the plasmid is the gene that encodes the toxin. Okay. Now we have here also that your exotoxin are the most toxic substances, and when treated with formaldehyde, the exotoxin polypeptides are converted into toxoids, which are used in protective vaccines. So we said earlier what your toxoids are. They are derived from toxins, kaya lang tinatanggal mo yung poisonous niya kasi nga natin sa pagka-poisonous or pagka-toxic niya. Of course, of which we have here different examples like your diphtheria toxin, we have your botulinum toxin, and all of those. Now, There are three principal types on the basis of their structure. You have the AV toxin, you have the membrane disrupting toxins, of which we said here you have your leucocidin and your hemolysins. And of course, your super antigens. These are those antigens that provoke a very intense immune response, non-specifically stimulate the proliferation of immune cells, which are your T cells, which will in turn secrete now enormous amounts of your cytokines. Okay, sabi na natin yan. So, nakaano naman yan. We get into your endotoxins. Ngayon lang nag-enter si Chi. Endotoxins. We can hear from, tawag po na yan. Diyan na si Harley. Judrick. Judrick. Wala si Judrick. Julie May Corpus. Ayan na si Judrick. Game na, Judrick. Judrick.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Endotoxins.
Um, Ma'am, endotoxins as composed of LPS portion of the outer membrane on the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria, and endotoxins are not considered. Do not have enzyme activity, secreted in only very small amounts. Yung kanina, ma'am, um, as compared, ma'am, dun sa exotoxins that is yes po, exotoxins that are ano po, mas parang virulent sila or mas um pathogenic sila kaysa sa endotoxins because they does endotoxins wala silang they does not contribute. Endotoxins do not have enzyme activity nga po, sabi nga. And they are only in very small amount po, and limitado lang din po yung activity nila, and they are not specific. Yun nga po, not specific in their activity on host cells. Ayun po, not very potent, um, heat resistant, ayun po, less antigenic. Unlike sa iba na, unlike sa virulence factors ng iba that are varied ang antigenic nila. So, ayun din po, induce antibody production in a poor manner. No toxoid have been produced from enough endotoxin. So, yun lang po.
Okay. So, ito rin yung, pag maalala nyo ulit, composed of the LPS portion of the outer membrane, dito mo ma-associate yung nagkukos ng fever. Okay, tingnan natin dito. So, these are the effects of endotoxin. It stimulates the fever centers in the hypothalamus, initiates coagulation, and also severe neutropenia, and it stimulates interferon production and causes changes in carbohydrates, lipids, iron, and sensitivity to epinephrine. Okay, so now this is just a tabulated comparison of your exotoxin and your endotoxin, so that you take note here that you only get to see the endotoxin sa gram-negative. Kasi nga sabi natin, si endotoxin na yan, di ba part siya ng inyong LPS. Okay? So that as to heat stability, your exotoxin is heat labile, whereas sabi nga ni Judrick kanina dun sa ating slide that your endotoxin cannot be destroyed by heat, so that is, it is heat stable. Your exotoxin is highly potent and antigenic. Your endotoxin is less potent and antigenic. And of course, and so on and so forth. You have there the toxicity. Mas toxic si exo, less toxic si endo. Okay, so more here, the comparison. And anyway, these are all in your, I guess these are all in your module. So we get now into, we're done with your agent resistance. How about the host resistance? Sabi nga natin, it's a matter of Sino ba mananalo sa ating dalawa? Ikaw ba na microorganism o ako na host mo? Ako ako ang magpro-provide ng mga kailangan mo. So that we also have our physical barriers. So nga sabi natin kanina, unang-una would be your skin. And of course, we say it's a healthy and intact skin. So we have Julie May. Can you read this one? Julie May Corpus. Andyan si Julie May.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Sige, Julie.
So for host resistance, physical barriers, healthy intact skin, primary mechanical barrier to infection, has substantial numbers of microbial flora that contribute to a low pH, compete for nutrients, and produce bactericidal substances addition. Low pH resulting from long-chain fatty acids secreted by sebaceous glands ensures that relatively few organisms can survive and prosper in the acid environment.
Okay.
So,
Sige.
we have example Leptospira species, Francisella tularensis, and Treponema, capable of penetrating normal healthy skin, and then structure at the urethral opening, flushing action of urination, and the thick mucus plug in the cervical opening.
Okay. So, in contrast to that, di ba sabi natin, pag healthy or intact ang skin mo, hindi pwedeng pasukin ng microorganisms aside from the fact that you have your microbiota or your normal flora already on the skin. Exception here are your leptospira. Alam niyo si leptospira, the one that's causing your leptospirosis that is brought about by the ihi ng mga rodents or ng mga daga, di ba? These are able to penetrate normal healthy skin. Hindi kailangan ng breakage. Hindi kailangan ng sugat or anything. Like your Francisella tularensis brought about, Francisella tularensis is from cats, and then you have Treponema species. Okay? These microorganisms are able of penetrating normal healthy skin. Kasi we always say, pag merong primary line of defense natin is intact ang skin mo at healthy ang skin mo, then hindi makakapasok ang microorganism. Okay? So, when we talk of cleansing mechanism, pag cleansing kasi ang pinag-uusapan, parang iniisip natin kaagad, you're trying to get rid of the microorganism using detergents or water. But there are other cleansing mechanisms of the host, like desquamation of the skin surface. Alam natin na yung epithelial lining ng ating skin, meron niyang time na nag-change yung skin natin so that whatever normal flora that is on the skin also goes with the desquamation of the skin. And then, pag may bago na ulit na, nakikita nyo yung parang nagbabalat yung skin natin. So that is what we call desquamation. So that after that, meron pa rin tayong new skin. And then will come again your normal flora. Now, another cleansing mechanism is through our tears. Why? Because our tears now, they have the IgA and then these lysozymes. These lysozymes are enzymes that are naturally occurring and they are found in different body secretions. Like for example, nga itong ating tears, present din sila sa saliva, present din sila sa breast milk. So meron silang antimicrobial property. Okay? So in the respiratory tract, sabi nga natin kanina, the mucus traps particles and microbes and sweeps them to the oropharynx. Now, it gets to the oropharynx so that it doesn't get through the bronchioles. Okay? Now, that the trachea is lined with ciliary epithelium, also containing the cilia that sweep particles and organisms upward toward the oropharynx, so that your cough and sneeze reflex contributes to the removal of potentially infected agents. So lahat yan, cleansing mechanism. When we say of cleansing, you're trying to get rid of the microorganism. So we also have antimicrobial, we also talk about antimicrobial substances. What are these antimicrobial substances? Again, you have there your lysozyme, you have there your secretory IgA, the beta-lysins, and the interferon. All of these are They function as, pag sinabi natin antimicrobial, they would function in a way to get rid of the microorganisms. Then you have your indigenous microbial flora, which we already said is indigenous microbial flora or your normal flora or your microbiota, which compete with pathogens for nutrients and space. Sabi nga nila, matira ang matibay, nauna ako dito, iproprotektahan niya yung kanyang area from other pathogens trying to inhabit the body. And we have here your bacteriocins, which are substances that inhibit the growth of closely related bacteria. So, another line of defense of the host would be your phagocytosis, which we have been talking about from the beginning ng pa tayo sa ating bacterial structure. We have, which we say is the process by which phagocytes engulf and dispose of microorganisms and cell debris. And we have here now, ano ba yung mga cells that are in charge of these ones? We have our polymorphonuclear cells. They have the receptors on the cell membrane for some complement components that stimulate cell motion, the metabolic burst, and the secretion of the lysosome contents into a phagosome. And of course, now the macrophages, ito yung mga cells natin that play a role in the phagocytosis. So they circulate as monocytes for 1 to 2 days and then migrate through the blood vessel walls into the tissues and reside in specific tissues as part now of the mononuclear phagocyte system. Okay, so there are different mechanisms here. You have your chemotaxis. What is your chemotaxis? So this is the directed migration of your polymorphonuclear cells into the area of infection, so that the movement of the neutrophils between the endothelial cells of the blood vessels into the tissue is now termed as your diapedesis. As to the attachment, we said earlier, is facilitated by the binding of specific antibodies to the microorganism, wherein we have the process of opsonization. Ano yung opsonization? This is the coating of the bacterium with antibody or complement component that results in enhanced phagocytosis by the polymorphonuclear cells. And this can be accomplished by 3 different types of responses: through the IgG1 or IgG3 binds to the organism, or antibody response is insufficient for opsonization but complement is fixed on the surface of the organism, or it can be also through alternative complement pathway that is activated by the endotoxin or polysaccharides of the organism. And then ingestion. Ingestion, the cell membranes of the phagocytic cell invaginates and surrounds the attached particles, so that the lysosome now release their content into the phagosome, which will result now to degranulation. Okay? And of course, the killing, we already know of this one, but the metabolic or the respiratory burst is that phagocytosis of a particle triggers a significant increase in the metabolic activity of the neutrophil or macrophage, which will lead now into the what we call the metabolic or your respiratory burst. So there is an increase in glycolysis. What is glycolysis? When we say it's the glycolysis, ano na si glycolysis natin? Harley, wala ka pa rin? Harley? Si Chi. Kasi parang kapapasok lang ni Chi. Chi? Joshua. Busy yata si Joshua sa ating sa ating anong ating when we glycolysis? What's glycolysis? Mary Dane or anyone? Anyone? When we say glycolysis, this is the Sige, sino yun?
Breakdown of glucose.
Okay. O pag nag-breakdown ang glucose, what happens? Anong nare-release?
Yung end product.
Ah?
Charot.
Go. Saan nangyayari ang glycolysis? Magproproduce siya na. Bakit tayo magkakaroon ngayon dyan ng metabolic or respiratory burst? And there is an increase in glycolysis. Doon sa ating, going back to our needs of the microorganism. Yes, sino yun?
Dexter po.
Okay, Dexter.
Mami, doon po sa burst of
Respiratory or metabolic
Ma'am, kasi
burst.
ma'am, ma'am, kasi kailangan ng oxygen. Therefore, kasi yung glycolysis, ma'am, kailangan niya ng oxygen, ma'am. Kaya respiratory burst kasi you need to inhale or compensate on doon sa magagamit dito sa pathway na to.
Okay.
Breakdown of glucose, ma'am, to produce ATP.
Kailangan mo ng
Oxygen po.
oxygen. So that, ano yung process dito na nagagamit? It's more of respiration. Okay. Okay. So that when there is an increase in glycolysis, as we said, the breakdown of glycogen, wherein you're needing extra energy, but this will be more of the process of respiration. So, inflammation, we have now, alam niyo naman kung anong inflammation, it's also a defense mechanism wherein it is the body's response to injury or foreign body. And the hallmark of your bulol na si ma'am. The hallmark of inflammation when we say is the accumulation of large numbers of phagocytic cells. Lahat ito na-experience niyo. Pag nakita niyo may inflammation, di ba nakikita niyo yung namamaga, yung meron siyang, that's why we talk of the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation, yung tinatawag natin sa fission ninyo, rubor, calor, palor ba yun? Rubor, calor, tumor, and rubor. Diba? Swelling is tumor. Redness is rubor. Heat is
calor, ma'am.
Calor, and pain
is dolor, ma'am.
Dolor. So those are the signs of inflammation. Wherein pag nagkaroon kasi ng inflammation, is that pupunta lahat dun yung ating WBC or the cells that are responsible for trying to neutralize. Kasi alam mong merong foreign body doon. Ngayon, pupunta lahat sila doon. Ang una mangyayari is because of the accumulation of all the cells in that area, then magkakaroon ng inflammation. Okay? So you have there the cardinal signs of your inflammation. You have swelling, redness, pain, heat, and pain. And of course, then there will be loss of function. And the chemical mediators of inflammation, we know you have your histamine, you have your kinase, leukotrienes, prostaglandins, and also your cytokines. And again, we get into the immune response. I was thinking of this one kasi in your fission, you already had, nag-fission na kayo, di ba? So that also in your immunology, may immunology kayo ngayon? Immunocero?
Wala po, ma'am.
Wala pa kayong immunology. Pero you have had this in your physiology or wala? Your immune responses, you have your natural, or your adaptive? Meron, wala? Tam. Hello.
Ano, ma'am?
Nag-lesson na kayo ng immune response?
Ma'am,
Non-fission ninyo, Hanafi?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, review.
Yes, ma'am.
Sige. Sino pang hindi natawag? Mag-recite na. Ha? Mag-recite na hindi pa natawag. Immunity. Natawag na kita.
Ma'am, si ano po?
Yung mga hindi
Ma'am,
ko pa
si Ralph.
Sino? Natawag ko na si Alfred, si Brandon. Si Charlene, hindi ko alam kung may mic pero nagchat-chat siya eh. Si Dexter. Tapos
Si Ralph po.
si Ralph, tinawag ko kanina, di ba? Hindi. O, game Ralph, para burahin ko yung pangalan mo sa hindi sumagot. Ralph. Asan na si Ralph? Wala naman. Ralph. Si Queen. Asan si Queen? Wala si Queen, si LM. Si Queen na lang. Tumagot na si Queen.
Ma'am, yung immunity, yun yung capability ng katawan natin para ma-protect against yung harmful microorganisms po. Tapos, immune system. Yung immune system, it consists of numerous cells and protein molecules that are responsible for recognizing and removing these foreign substances.
Okay, differentiate your innate from adaptive.
Ano po?
Yung broad categories ng ating immunity. Innate or natural, adaptive or specific. Pag sinabi natin innate,
Ma'am, yung innate po, yun nakalagay dyan, little or no specificity. Tapos
bakit siya tinawag na natural immunity?
Ano po?
Bakit siya tinawag din yung innate or natural immunity?
Bakit tinawag?
Bakit natin siya tinawag na natural immunity? Pag sinabi natin innate.
Ma'am, pag innate yung natural. Natural na.
Kaya nga innate or natural, bakit siya tinatawag na natural?
Ma'am, meron na po dati.
Meron na dati. Okay. So that adaptive. Okay. Kasi okay, so adaptive or specific, this is more highly specialized because now this is just to show you innate. Sabi mo nga kanina, now this would be your immediate response to the pathogen that does not confer long-lasting protective immunity. Okay, so this can be through physical and chemical barriers, pwede siyang through blood proteins that act as mediators of infection, and yung ating cellular mechanism capable of phagocytosis such as yung mga neutrophils and macrophages and other leukocytes such as natural killer cells. Whereas when we say adaptive or specific immunity, this is capable of being specific for distant molecules, responding in particular ways to different types of foreign substances and developing memory. Yung developing memory kasi, di ba sabi natin yung antigen-antibody antigen-antibody complex, that these are specific reactions. So that once you have been exposed to this antigen and you have developed that antibody for that antigen, at pag nag-repeat si the same antigen in the future, kilala na siya ni antibody natin. Okay? So that the major constituents of your adaptive or specific immune response are your lymphocytes and your antibodies. So that ito yung immunologic memory natin. They're able to remember each time it encounters a particular foreign antigen. Kaya sabi natin yan, lifelong immunity. Kasi kilala na kita, hindi ka na andyan ka na naman, so andun na sa antibody to protect the host. So, it can be either now humoral or cellular. When we say humoral immune system, this is antibody mediated. Okay? So that if it's antibody mediated, you have all your different antibodies. Ano yung antibodies natin from your immunoglobulin G to your immunoglobulin M, and then you have your immunoglobulin A, D, and E. Okay. So, nakikita nyo yan. Iyan yung sa IgG kasi ang most common would be your IgG and your IgM. So that this is the structure of your IgG na tinatawag nating you have there your FC fragment and the Fab fragment. Dito mag-a-attach yung ating antigen. Okay? So that your IgG can cross the maternal placenta to the fetus. So there is passive immunity for newborns, neutralization of viruses and exotoxin, and response best to protein antigens mainly involved in secondary immune response. Whereas your immunoglobulin M, now you have here, they cannot cross the placenta. And kung dun sa IgG natin kanina, it consists only of two basic parts. Your IgM consists of 5 basic subunits. So nakikita nyo yung kanyang branches doon. Okay? Your IgA, this is predominant immunoglobulin class in certain body secretions. Again, like your, ano sabi natin kanina, yung meron siyang normal, the enzyme that is seen in body secretions. Ano yung enzyme natin? Naturally occurring enzyme that is found in bodily secretions like your tears, saliva, and also in breast milk. Ano na yun? Ano yung enzyme? Pure? Diyan. Meron nag-text. Enzyme. IgA is your antibody. That's an immunoglobulin A. Enzyme.
Sorry, ma'am. Naka-open natin yung ano.
Lysozyme.
Bakit po kasi kanina yung ano niya.
Mali yung na-text. Mali ba yung ano? Okay. So, we also have your E and D, but that the E is major role in allergic responses. And your D, it says that it may serve as a B cell receptor or play a role in autoallergic diseases. So those are your antibodies or immunoglobulin. Ang ano niyan is acronym nyo GAM din. Sabi ni Sherlyn, GAMDE. Okay. So, we have here your primary and secondary antibody responses. Of course, when we say primary, there is a rapid appearance of your IgM. If you remember, if you were reading some of the posts with regards to our rapid testing for the COVID-19 or your SARS-CoV-2, is that tinetest natin ang IgM and IgG so that hindi kayo mawala lagi. The first one that usually appears with these immunoglobulins would be your IgM. M for mauna siya lagi na mag-appear. Okay? Whereas now, the other type of immune response would be your cell-mediated. If the first one is your humoral mediated, that is with the B lymphocytes, the cell-mediated, here you have our T lymphocytes. So that cell-mediated immune response is based on the action of specific kinds of T lymphocytes that directly attack the cells that are infected with the virus, parasites, cancer cells, or transplanted cells. So, the mechanisms by which microbes may overcome host defenses, we have here, first we have tolerance, immunosuppression, change in the appropriate target for the immune response, and again, we have here your antigenic variation. So that when we're talking about tolerance, this is the inability to induce an immune response to a microbial antigen. Transmission. When we talk of transmission, Ito na yun dun sa you have there the agent, then you have your, sa ating, reservoir, and then you have the portal of exit, then you have the mode of transmission, then you have the portal of entry. So, most pathogens are acquired from external sources. So that when we talk of transmission, this would be how would usually kasi kung ano yung port of exit niya, yun din yung port of entry. So that we have different modes of transmission. You have airborne transmission, then you have your transmission by food and water, you have your close contacts, cuts and bites, pero usually kasi yan, direct or indirect, modes of transmission. So that when we say airborne, this is usually through respiratory spread, which is the most common. Why? Because you try to, the agent is brought about by aerosols through coughing, sneezing, and talking. So that this is examples of this would be now what we're having right now is your SARS-CoV-2 kasi yung COVID-19 yun yung sakit. Ang etiologic agent niya ay si SARS-CoV-2. Now, examples here are also TB, brucellosis, tularemia, and legionellosis and plague. This is through the inhalation of infectious particles in liquid droplets. So, what are droplet nuclei? So, medyo kasi meron tayo yung airborne at saka pag airborne tsaka aerosol. So, we said that when you say the airborne is depende yan sa size ng particle. So, that a droplet nuclei, ito yung residue from the evaporation of fluid from larger droplets and are light enough to remain airborne for long periods. So that, for example, ulit, yung TB bacilli natin, pag na-release yan into the environment, pwede siya magstay dyan ng at least 72 hours. So, kaya usually, pag gumagawa tayo ng ating AFB smear or your direct sputum smear, yan ay sa open air kung hindi tayo gumagawa sa loob ng biosafety cabinets. Now, we had our fecal oral route, which is, of course, common cause, the most common organism here would be our E. coli and also your Vibrio cholera. So that when we say fecal oral is the microorganism gets into our hands and then we do not wash our hands before we prepare food or when we eat our food, thereby contaminating what comes into our body. Kaya tinawag siyang fecal oral. So, yan yung transmission by food and water. And of course, you have the close contact, passage of organisms by salivary, skin, and genital contact, which dito papasok din yung ating sexually transmitted diseases, cuts and bites, infection by the mouth flora, like when you get a dog bite or you have the cat bite. And then, arthropods, ito naman yung sa galing from ticks, flea, or the mite bites. And then zoonosis, this will depend on the contact with animals or animal products. So, portal of entry for some common pathogens. So, nakita natin pag sa respiratory tract, ano yung mga pathogens that gets through the respiratory tract. You have your Streptococcus pneumoniae, you have your Neisseria meningitidis, Haemophilus influenza, TB, and also your Bordetella pertussis, gastrointestinal, Salmonella. And then you have your Vibrio, skin, Clostridium, Rickettsia. And of course, we have here just the numbers of invading microorganisms, or we're just checking for the infectious dose or the lethal dose. So that when we're talking of infectious dose, this would be the number of microorganisms that would be able to cause the infection. So that now, if we say infectious dose ID50, that is the infectious dose for 50% of a sample population. So that you have to compare the relative virulence under experimental conditions. Where your LD50 or the lethal dose of 50% of a sample population is now talking about the potency. okay, of a toxin, wherein we say that the potency of a botulinum toxin is 0.03 nanograms per kilogram, whereas for your Shiga toxin is 250 nanograms per kilogram, and staphylococcal enterotoxins 1,350 nanogram per kilogram. So judging from this one, you would see that the botulinum toxin is now the most potent among all of those. And this is the last slide, I think. So again, you come here into the host microorganism interaction. Sabi nga natin kanina, the host microbe interaction or relationship begins once the microbe has gained entry into the host or the human being. So that when the encounter and entry, so the pathogen encounters and now colonizes the host surface. It will be able to colonize only once it has gained entry into the host. So that once it is inside, it can now multiply and of course, mababaliwala lahat yung ating host surface defenses and magiging invasive siya. Andun na yung invasion and dissemination. And of course now, the pathogen completes the cycle. It can either leave the host, it can destroy the host, or it can remain latent. Sabi natin kanina, pag ikaw ay anong type of courier ka na, pag nasa iyo yung microorganism for life, or it can be destroyed by the host. So this is again your corresponding infection disease stages we're in. We have your incubation stage, prodromal, clinical, stage of decline, and the convalescent stage, of which kung nakita na natin dun sa incubation stage, alam na natin exposure, pwede rin naman natin i-cut na dyan yung chain para hindi na siya matuloy dun sa kanyang infection. Okay, or at the prodromal, you have the signs and symptoms. You can come up with a specific management. Pwede na rin i-cut dyan. Okay, but otherwise, if it gets in progress through all these stages, so you get into the incubation stage, prodromal, clinical, stage of decline, and then of course, the full recovery of the surviving host, or if it doesn't recover, syempre meron naman dyan rehab. Pag hindi na rehab, well, we say it can get into death. Okay, so that's the end of slide. Sorry, ma'am, inaayos ko po. Okay, okay na diyan. So, I hope that with the prayer of, sino na ulit? Nakalimutan ko na ulit sino nag-pray kanina. Sino nag